this time last year, Mission Capital was really centering their commitment to the sector. They were engaging in the search for their next CEO, and really wanting to be sure that moving forward, that they were engaging staff and community in meaningful dialogue, that they were identifying gaps in capacity, learning, and programming within the nonprofit sector here in Central Texas, and really working to strengthen the collective ability to solve problems creatively. So one of the things that they did in order to do that was developed a survey that really was conceptualized, like I said, more than a year ago in March of 2023, that they then piloted with a few external organizations to make sure that the questions were relevant and meaningful to those of us here in the nonprofit sector. Launched the survey in August and really closed it at the end of August with 216 respondents. The survey was sent to around 750 individuals with a request that one person from each organization respond, and that the responses be coming from organizations that were either nonprofit organizations here in Central Texas or philanthropic organizations here in Central Texas. So from this survey, there were a series of quantitative, more sort of multiple choice, or for those of you who know, a Likert scale, so a strongly agreed, strongly disagreed type scale questions. And then there was also a series of maybe a third of the survey were more open-ended questions that revolved around certain groups of people, including nonprofit team members, board members, volunteers, and then communities that were being served, as well as focusing on certain topics like capacity and opportunity for growth and things like that. I'm going to go through a bunch of the results or the findings that surfaced from the more quantitative results, and then we will talk a little bit more about the qualitative approach and then the results there as well. So first of all, there were a few statements in the survey that really had a high rate of agreement in the responses from the 216 respondents. So not every person in that 216 responded to every question. So some of these percentages might represent, one or two more individuals, depending on what folks skipped. But generally, we can think of this as just over 200 responses. So 97% of participants agreed that partnerships advance their work. 89% agreed that their programs and services were high quality. And 71% agreed that growth is a priority. So thinking back to, end of August of 2023, we were sort of at the beginning of the end of the pandemic, moving back into the new normal. And I think everyone who has been here or lived here or worked here in Central Texas would also agree that growth was generally a priority for all of us, not just in the nonprofit sector at that time. Another set of questions asked about where there was agreement along areas for improvement. So even though you can think of these as sort of reverse scored questions. So 46% said that plans for growth was an area of improvement. 34% agreed that a sustainable revenue model was an area for improvement. And then 24% said that their growth was not proportional, right, to the region's growth. So you could think of these as statements where we asked, do you agree, right, that you have articulated plans for growth? And so 46% were actually disagreeing with that statement. Again, it sort of reflects what we saw before and will carry through on several of the themes that you'll see later. But basically, folks were really focused on sustainability and growth in order to sustain the high quality of their services. We also asked questions about, or Mission Capital also asked questions about staff support and satisfaction. And so here we see the areas of high agreement. So 65% of respondents agreed that they felt their staff were encouraged and actually had the capacity for professional development. 67% agreed that the staff or the characteristics, the identities and lived experiences of the staff reflected those of their clients, and 78% agreed that human resource policies and practices were consistent with values and culture. You can definitely see here that the like level of agreement is quite a bit less, right, than what we saw on the previous slide, although still the majority of respondents were agreeing with these statements. In line with that, there were some areas of need for staff development, and those included compensating staff at a competitive level, building a pipeline for leadership and succession in general, and then also retaining staff. So again, highly aligned sort of internally with each other. It's very consistent sorts of responses, and also highly aligned with what we saw before in terms of like needing to have the capacity and the resources in order to sustain high quality services in a time of growth. We asked about board and governance, and so here we can see the trend continues from team members to board and governance. So 64% of respondents agreed that their board members understand the work that needs to be done and they help set strategic priorities. 42% agreed that the board demographics and the board sort of identities and lived experiences reflected those of the communities being served. And only 46% agreed that their board members engaged in sort of that resource development, right? So fundraising and generating revenue. Specific to needs, the increased board fundraising and building a board that is representative, so that has shared identities and experiences with the communities being served, were the two highest expressed as needs, followed by preparing for leadership transitions and strengthening board governance. In terms of the communities that we were engaging with, 82% of respondents agreed that clients referred or shared their information with others, which is sort of an indicator of satisfaction. 79% agreed that clients actually had input in shaping organizational decision-making, and 62% agreed that clients know how to do that input, right? How to provide that input back to the organization. In terms of client needs, there was a need for an expressed need for increased capacity to support client engagement, as well as strategies to support that increased client engagement, and media to do the same. So basically, there were some agreement that clients knew how to provide input and were being engaged in providing input. But then when you think of engagement more broadly, there was a need to continue to sustain that and even increase that in terms of the infrastructures and the sort of processes that were set up to do that. So all of these sort of lead us to some findings in financial health and sustainability. So all of the previous responses, right, talked about growth, about resource development, about fundraising, about the need for capacity to do things like professional development as well as client engagement. And that is also reflected here. So 71% of participants agreed that investing in growth was a priority. And then 34% agreed that their revenue model was sustainable and supported goals. So in other words, more respondents disagreed that they had a sustainable revenue model. And then 46% agreed that they had clearly articulated plans for this growth. So overall, the quantitative, the sort of numerical data were telling us a story about experiencing and realizing the need for planning for growth, as well as not having necessarily the access to all of the resources and supports in order to plan for and sort of advance that growth. So when Mission Capital got to the point of reviewing the survey responses, both the quantitative and the qualitative responses, they realized that a lot of what they had done up to this point definitely engaged with community members and sort of involved and included the voice of community members. But they also realized that they could do more, especially in the analysis process of the qualitative findings, to really push the entire project and the learning experience more towards a community-owned perspective, and one that could help lead us to community-owned solutions as well, or strategies as a result. And so at that point, they engaged with us at Capacity Catalyst in order to deploy a method of qualitative analysis called the most significant change framework. And so from that point forward, we really engaged deeply with multiple community members in order to co-analyze the qualitative, the more open-ended, the more narrative responses to the survey. That included 50 participants, all of whom had been invited to respond to the survey, and many of whom had actually completed the survey, myself included, on behalf of their nonprofit or philanthropic organizations. And so we were able to engage with 50 participants in a series of, I always forget, it was like 6 or 7 community sense-making sessions, where each of us reviewed a group of responses, the narrative or text responses from each individual participant. And in that review, looked for trends and values and other common themes that were coming up across the narrative responses. So we conceptualized of each response as sort of a description of the experience of leading a nonprofit or a philanthropy in Central Texas in, summer, August 2023. And as we went through and had discussions about the themes that each individual reviewer was seeing, we saw that there were 5 themes that really emerged, many of them overlapping, and one of them really seeming to be a more core or central theme. So these 5 themes were growth management, right, which really resonates with the quantitative data we saw. And then along with that, things like sustainable funding, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, effective collaboration, and then talent and people. In order to bring some color to these, I'm going to go through these really quickly. So in growth management, we heard things like, as we expand, aligning our growth with strategic goals and community needs becomes increasingly challenging but essential. Retention struggles are real. Competitive wages are not just a desire, they are a necessity. Sustainable funding, very similarly, our survival depends on securing long-term funding that allows us to plan. We need long-term funding commitments to truly build capacity. Then we move to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. True inclusivity means embedding diversity into every layer of our organization. Diversity in leadership is not just about fairness, it's actually about enriching our perspectives and effectiveness. For effective collaboration, we're multiplying our insights and our impact. We are achieving more together than any of us could alone. And then we are stronger together. Collaborations can amplify our impact beyond what any of us can achieve alone. And so these are like 2 different participants' words, but they are so highly aligned, they're almost using the exact same words to describe what their experience has been like. And then finally, for talent and people, retention struggles are real, right? This echoes back to something we heard before. And then we're at an inflection point. So rather than continue to just promote structures that oppress staff and the meaningful work they're trying to do, we need to champion new and more progressive models of organizational leadership. So as you can tell from the quotes, these 5 themes really did well aligned with each other, and in some ways it was hard to tease them apart from each other. So that's why we used the Venn diagram earlier to create a visual of them, because they really are highly overlapping, and growth management really did seem to be like a core or central driver of even each of the experiences across the other 4 themes. So what we took away from this, and the we here is actually the 50 community participants, not just Capacity Catalyst and or Mission Capital. But really, we felt like possibly these stories could be telling us that there is a need, right, to be more strategic in addressing funding and staffing challenges, that really equity and inclusion are key, and that they can be enhanced through policies and practices. And then finally, that collaboration was a real opportunity that could be used to, amplify and generate greater impact sector wide.